Just briefly, you've been asked several times, I've heard the questions about your work as co-chair of the Delaware Supreme Court's Diversity Strategic Planning Steering Committee. That's a mouthful, but you've been asked about this. I just want to ask you about one thing in the report. The report talks about how important it is for the Delaware Supreme Court, I'm going to quote now, to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. And it goes on to say that one of the things that might reduce identity threat is to get rid of the historic portraits of some of the white justices who've served on the court. Can you explain to me what identity threat is and why getting rid of portraits of judges and justices who've served on the courts would help with that?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator. I am not familiar with the term identity threat, so I don't have an explanation for. I don't have a definition for you. I can give you a definition of.
It's in the report, though. I mean, I'm quoting: to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. I mean, this is your report.
Well, I understand, but one thing that I've attempted to explain is that I didn't draft the report. We had an entire committee that was creating a report to be delivered to the Supreme Court.
Yes, you signed off on it, though, didn't you?
So there wasn't a sign-off necessarily on the report.
Your name's on it, though.
I understand. I was a co-chair of the committee, but I didn't draft all the words to the report. I didn't draft the recommendations to the report. The Supreme Court is considering the report, and we haven't done anything with that particular recommendation.
So you don't know what identity threat is?
Well, I did not put those words in there, and I'm not entirely sure what whoever drafted that specific one meant by that one.
It seems kind of crazy to me, I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to clarify this because you've had three people.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all the nominees. Thanks for being here. Mr. Tubb, if I could just start with you. I want to talk about an issue in my home state. Just over a month ago in August, Knox County in Missouri was struck by an EF2 tornado, destroyed 62 homes, also destroyed the Bering, Missouri post office. I mean, almost completely. It leveled it. And current reports are that that post office will not be rebuilt. Now, you can probably understand my concern with this. This is a small rural community, much like the one that I grew up in. The post office, as you know, is a lifeline to these communities. I mean, it's contact with the outside world, of course. It's a delivery mechanism for medical supplies. It's absolutely vital that our rural communities have access, like everybody else, to regular postal service. So I realize what your role is on the Regulatory Commission, and it's primarily an oversight role, but let me just ask you, do you agree that the Postal Service should prioritize rebuilding rural post offices in a timely manner so that we can keep the flow of mail and other services available to everybody across the country?
110%, Senator. This has been an area that the Commission has actually been concerned about in providing oversight. It's suspended post offices, where the Postal Service, for emergency reasons, suspends a post office. And we have found, unfortunately, over the years that they tend to drag their feet as to making that decision on reopening. And just to underscore how much I agree with the concern, Senator, I was born and raised in northern New York State in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. I was chief of staff for a decade to Congressman John McHugh, who represented that area. It was 14,000 square miles, one of the largest House districts east of the Mississippi. And a lot of those communities may not have had much, but what they did have was a post office. And that's critical to binding our nation together.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's absolutely vital that we keep these rural post offices open, and that when they are faced with challenges, particularly natural disasters, that we rebuild them as quickly as possible. And I don't have to tell you, I mean, for many of these communities, if you say your post office is not going to be rebuilt, it's almost a death sentence. I mean, you're saying to the community, we're just going to cut you off from the rest of the world. We're going to cut off your ability to get to the prescriptions you need, to get the information you need, to get the deliveries that you need. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I hope you'll work with me as it relates to Bering, and I may have more to follow up with you about that.
Happy to, Senator.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Okocha, let me ask you, I noticed that you've served on the board of directors of a foundation called the Green Lining Institute. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yes, Senator.
Since 2021, looks like?
Yes, Senator.
And you were previously a legal fellow at the same institute? The website of the organization says that it focuses on, I'm going to quote it now, the intersection of climate action, racial justice, and economic equity. Have I got that right?
I believe so, Senator.
Okay,
Yes.
fair enough. All right, so I assume that you're also familiar with the Supreme Court's recent and widely reported, much commented upon decision, Student for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. You know about that case?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, that's the case that held that Harvard and some other universities, that their admissions programs that took into account race-based factors were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause. All right, I'm asking you this because I want to ask you something that the Greenlighting Institute said about that case. The Greenlighting Institute said that that ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States, striking down consideration of race in college admissions, that's an accurate rehearsal of what the opinion is, that decision is a willful disregard of America's racist history. Let me ask you, does that represent your view?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that statement, and I can tell you, Senator, that I did not aid in crafting that statement, and I can tell you that I recognize that SFFA versus Harvard is the law of the land, and that if I were confirmed as a judge, I would apply that law and would apply the law in SFFA versus Harvard.
Okay, very good. Let me ask you about one other. It's a lengthy statement, but let me ask you about one other piece of it. Same statement from the Greenlighting Institute about the same case. The statement is, this quote is, we need race-conscious solutions to the longstanding and persistent structural barriers caused by systemic racism. Now, the reason I'm asking about that is that's exactly what the Supreme Court says in the Fair case the universities may not do. So does this reflect your view of the law?
Senator, I'm also not familiar with that statement, and I can tell you that if confirmed as a judge, I would apply the binding precedent that you spoke of, SFFA versus Harvard, if a case of affirmative action were to come before me.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to drive towards, is obviously you can think whatever you want about the cases. I've been known to criticize Supreme Court cases quite vociferously if I think that they're wrong. But of course, the position that you're going to have, should you be confirmed, will be different. And I just want to be sure that whatever your views may be on any number of cases, that whether you like it or hate it or whatever you think of the precedent, if it's binding precedent, that you'll apply it faithfully. And your testimony is today is that you will, whatever your views may be. Is that correct? I've got that right?
Yes, Senator, without a doubt.
Okay. Let me ask you about something else unrelated to this, but related to your work as a prosecutor. You said earlier that you have experienced prosecuting cases involving sex abuse, and the materials you submitted to the committee, I noticed that includes sexual abuse of minors. I'm wondering if you've ever prosecuted a case involving child sex abuse material, CSAM.
Yes, Senator.
So my question is on that. Do you think, reflect a little bit on your experience in these horrible cases, do you think that criminal penalties against those who are convicted of child sex abuse material, distributing it, having it, making it, using it, do you think that those penalties ought to be strengthened? Do you think we're doing enough to punish and deter the people who engage in that kind of terrible behavior?
Senator, what I can tell you is that I don't believe that's my province. I think that's the province of yourself and other legislatures to determine what the appropriate sentences should be, maximum sentences should be with regards to those crimes. But I can tell you that as a prosecutor, I have worked hard to make sure that people who do commit those crimes are held accountable.
Very good. I'll have some other questions for those of you I didn't get to ask a question. I'm sure I'm just very disappointed I didn't get to ask you questions. So I'll submit a few for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks so much.